on the subject of authority, of Catholic doctrine, of establishing or changing, I do want to discuss 5 different things that have changed as far as what their authority says is okay. Now, I'm going to read you what the rule was, and then I'm going to read how it changed. Usury was the first thing. Interpreted literally, this prohibition against profiting on loans played a major role in the creation of the European credit market during the Middle Ages. Bankers had to devise methods of profiting from money lending without directly charging interest. How it changed. The rule simply faded away as European capitalism developed during the Renaissance. This charging of interest forms the basis of the modern financial system. So economic history might have turned out quite differently had the rules stayed in place. The Islamic banking system, where usury is still prohibited, gives a pretty good picture of how finance might have worked without interest. This is an example of the Roman Catholic Church shifting with societal norms, with society, rather than standing firm in doctrine. The next thing is slavery. The original rule, no less an authority than St. Augustine, said that Jesus Christ did not make men free from being slaves. That's pretty heavy. As late as 1860, the church taught that it was not a sin to own another human being so long as the slave was treated humanely. Now, how it changed. The church never really took a firm stance against slavery until the practice was already largely banished in the Western world. Pope Gregory XVI was the first to criticize slavery in 1839, though he had left a good deal of room for interpretation, so he wasn't clear. It wasn't until Leo, the first 20th century pope, that the church took a firm stance against slavery as a moral outrage. Today, the Catholic Church is in the forefront of efforts to eliminate modern-day slavery. So another example of the Roman Catholic Church shifting with society rather than standing firm in their faith or having good convictions to begin with. Now, granted, sure, slavery was rampant. I understand that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is they had a stance and it has shifted. So is their authority divine or is their authority fallible? Now, Vatican II. When? 1962 to 1965, the original rule. Traditionally, Catholic Mass was celebrated in the original Latin, with priests facing away from congregants. More generally, the institution of the church maintained a level of distance from both followers and the modern world as a whole. How it changed. Few events in church history have done more to change the way Catholicism is lived by its followers than the Second Vatican Council. In addition to allowing Mass to be celebrated in local languages, the church undertook a number of initiatives, including the promotion of lay ministers, greater dialogue with other faiths, and more decentralization of authority to dioceses. Next one up is capital punishment. 1995. Original rule. The church was not traditionally opposed to the death penalty for particularly horrible crimes. Catholic theologians, including Thomas Aquinas, wrote vigorously in defense of its use. Some popes even issued death sentences themselves in their capacity as civil rulers. Now, how it changed. Support for the death penalty had waned in the church over the years, but it wasn't until John Paul II that the Vatican's opposition was stated explicitly. He wrote that although the death penalty was permissible in extreme cases when society was at risk, improvements in the modern judicial system made such cases practically non-existent. Benedict, one of the Benedicts, the current pontiff, is a vocal critic of the death penalty and even publicly opposed its use in Saddam Hussein. The next one is limbo. And honestly, I'm pretty sure this is the same as purgatory. I could be wrong. I never learned about limbo. I went to Catholic school, all of elementary school, half of middle school, and a year of high school. I was getting kicked in and out of these schools. I was a trouble child. But I spent a lot of time in Catholic school. I've like heard the term limbo, but it was always preached to us. It was always taught to us as purgatory. So I assume it's the same thing. Honestly, if I'm wrong about that, then correct me. But I think this is equivalent to purgatory. So the original rule in traditional Catholic theology, limbo is the halfway point between heaven and hell where unbaptized, including infants, go after death. Even though they had committed no sins, such people had not been cleansed of the original sin through baptism. Now, how it changed. Limbo, or purgatory, I think, was never a particularly popular concept with the parishioners. It's not surprising. And modern priests rarely discussed it. In 2004, John Paul II formed a commission to come up with a more coherent and enlightened way of describing what happens to infants who die. In 2007, Benedict signed a report recommending the concept be dropped altogether. Instead of going to limbo or purgatory, unbaptized babies would enjoy eternal happiness after death, but would not achieve communion with God. So here are 5 examples in which virtually all of them, the Catholics switched, shifted, changed, altered, grew, however you want to say it, with society, which I find problematic because it's not based on your faith or your interpretation of your faith. It's based on societal pressure. It's based on sociological growth. These things are problematic when we're speaking about something that should be infallible, when we're saying that a group of Christians are the ultimate authority. That's problematic to me. So you have usury, slavery, Vatican II, capital punishment, and limbo or purgatory are all examples of things that have shifted, mostly societally, or at least from pressure or shifts in society. In the last 2 centuries, there have also been some dramatic changes in social teachings. Pope Gregory in 1832 condemned freedom of conscience in society as an, quote, absurd and erroneous teaching, or rather madness. Pope Leo in the 19th century condemned the modern liberties and opposed the equality and participation of citizens in civic and political life. The people, he wrote, are, quote, the untutored multitude that must, quote, be controlled by the authority of law, end quote. Vatican II, however, accepted religious liberty for all human beings.